Hi, welcome to Ava True Stories channel. We hope you'll have fun with us. Enjoy watching. It was a thrilling night for me as I woke up next to my sleeping son. Sleep would not come. Not today. Not for weeks, really. As I lay in bed on a calm Tuesday, looking at the ceiling, the gentle tick of the clock on my nightstand, and noting each passing second bed was very large. My husband Charlie's stepfather worked long hours and sometimes returned home late or never came home at all, citing exhaustion from business dinners and client meetings as his excuse. The emptiness alongside me served as a continual reminder of how lonely things had grown. I'd stopped trying to figure it out a long time ago, but there was more to the quiet than his absence. It was the presence of something more profound, something that had been quietly infiltrating my existence. And then there was my kid, Charlie. I'd raised him since he was a little boy, but in the last year it was as if I'd never seen him before. He was no longer the skinny teen who leave the garbage can lit a jar or stay up all night playing video games. He was a man 20 years old and a college freshman with an air of mystery and confidence that made my C***** T tight tan in ways words couldn't describe. I despised myself for paying attention and for allowing my mind to wander to inappropriate places. However, despite my best efforts, these thoughts invariably returned. Suddenly the silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps, slow and methodical, padding down the hallway outside my room. For some reason my heart raced, holding my breath. I listened as the footsteps faded down the hall and past my door. It was Charlie. He got up to grab something to drink. My heart was pounding, so I closed my eyes and tried to relax. I shook my head, shoving the thoughts out of my head. Nothing was going to happen that night, at least not yet, but the following morning I found him in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a cup of coffee. The light from the window caught the angles of his face in a way that made me stop what I was doing. His voice was low and somewhat hoarse, still heavy from sleep. But I managed to respond with my own voice as he turned to me, a little smile, nipping at his lips. And he said it in a mournful tone. Feeling a bit overwhelmed, I preoccupied myself with the coffee maker to divert his attention. "Couldn't you get any sleep last night?" he inquired in a kind while casual tone. My eyes swept across him. Surprised, "Why are you inquiring?" against the counter. He leaned and shrugged. "I thought something was bothering you since I could hear you fidgeting in bed." As a result of my restlessness, I shook my head and faked a chuckle. I guess I had a lot on my mind. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine for a second before he averted them, sipping his coffee. The word hovered in the air between us, weighing me down. I wanted to ask him what was bothering him, what kept him up at night, but I refrained. Instead, I tried to distract myself by focusing on the hum of the coffee maker and the way the sunlight filtered across the counter. Later that afternoon, as the TV softly played in the background, I found myself in the living room. Folding laundry, Charlie was sprawled out on the couch, his legs crossed at the ankles, and he was scrolling through his phone. It was a familiar everyday scene, but I couldn't help but stare at him. Is folding clothes something you ever do, or is it more of a mom thing? I tried to divert my attention by teasing. A gradual smile crept across his face as he glanced upward. "As far as I can tell, that's just a mom thing." I tossed a rolled-up sock at him while rolling my eyes. "Yeah, he got it." He threw it back with ease, laughing the whole while. "Watch out," I warned. Attempting to come off as severe, he sat up and put his phone aside as he responded, "I'll help." After failing to resolve those issues, he got down from the couch and kneeled down next to me, taking a towel with him and folding it with such accuracy that I couldn't help but scoff. "That was truly remarkable," I exclaimed. "Unbeknownst to me, you possessed that quality." He spoke in a playful but slightly mysterious tone, saying, "There's a lot you don't know about me." Not sure what he meant, took a quick peek at him, and my pulse raced at the sight of his intense gaze. I averted my gaze and redirected my attention to the clothes on my bed because there was an understated intensity in his eyes that caused my breath to catch. "Well, it's good to see that you're starting to do your share. Anything to make your life easier," he added. And that tone reappeared, warm, teasing with an edge, as I tried to maintain my voice steady before nightfall, and I felt like my world was collapsing around me. There was an underlying tension between Charlie and me that became more apparent with each interaction, and it made me feel more conflicted. I went to my room earlier than normal, shut the door, and sank onto the side of the bed. Because the silence was so oppressive, it was subtle, hardly perceptible, but impossible to ignore. The burden of my own ideas is weighing me down. Either I was ignorant of the situation or I was aware of it, but chose not to face it. I'll face it. I had a sneaking suspicion. This couldn't continue. Something had to give. Indeed, the story didn't end there. Day 3 started just like any other, except that there was an electric charge in the air between us. I pretended it was all in my head. It seemed like I was imposing my views on him. Every time we crossed paths in the hallway for breakfast or on his way to the yard, his state always seemed heavy. There was a gentleness in his voice that caused my C****** T to tighten that afternoon as I chopped veggies for supper. The rhythmic thud of the knife on the board was calming, a pleasant diversion from the chaos around me in my head. But suddenly, as if beckoned by my ideas, Lila materialized at the threshold. As he leaned against the door frame, he remarked, "This place smells nice." I stammered up a few words as I looked up and saw him. He'd been out in the yard. Shirt pulled up to his C******, T, perspiration glistening on his skin, hair slightly dished, and a slack-jawed smile on his face that sent shivers down my spine. Always saying you're hungry. He went into the kitchen, took a glass from the cupboard, filled it with water, and drank from it for quite a while before placing it on the counter. He remained leaning on the counter, observing my every move. While I got things done by all means, I attempted to disregard him, maintaining my concentration on the work at hand. I couldn't help but feel the weight of his stare. "Do you require assistance?" After a moment he inquired. I despised it. "That's it. You have already put in a full day's labor." Moving to stand by my side, he assured me I can at least keep you company. He assured me there was no problem. Hardly did I swallow. He casually grabbed for a carrot, took the peeler off the counter, and got to work, while my fists clenched around the knife. "Suit yourself," I murmured. Maintaining my tone-joined hand in hand we stood. The initially pleasant stillness between us is gradually giving way to heavier air. His warmth was palpable, and I could almost feel his arm lightly brush against mine as we walked. Still, my attention was abruptly drawn away from the veggies when in a quiet voice he asked, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, casting a glance at him. He paused, a little wrinkle appearing on his brow, feeling content. The question surprised me and left me speechless for a moment. My gaze shifted downward at the cutting board where I sought a solution as my knife remained still. "Can you explain?" After all he had said about Dad, the home and life in general, I eventually asked, "Are you happy?" My voice remained low throughout. Even I could feel the hollowness and the smile I faked. "Then why would you even bother to ask?" Reason being, "It appears that you're not. You're constantly going out of your way to help other people, but I'm not good at that," he added, standing firm. "When was the last time I noticed you relaxing?" His remarks caused a knot to form in my throat. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was okay, and that I didn't need anything. But I couldn't find the right words. "I'm fine," I said. "Never fear about my safety." I finally whispered my concerns. Pertained to his tone was kind yet forceful. When he spoke to you, looking at him, at that moment, I felt more than, Staring at him with such intensity caused my heart to skip a beat. There was a sense of mystery in his gaze. Something unspeakable and raw, and for a few seconds it felt like everything was spinning out of control. "Charlie." I began to speak, but my voice choked. I was confused about my desires. He extended his hand to brush against mine as I was about to speak, and the sensation sent a shockwave through me. Even though it was brief and harmless, the way it lingered caused my C****** T to clench. His voice was hardly heard as he continued, "I mean it. You have earned happiness," and I couldn't shake him that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The way he looked at me, the way his touch felt, everything about it. The weight of the house's silence settled over me. As I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, once again, My husband was away on a business trip, and the weight of his absence was palpable. The gentle sound of a door creaking open shattered the stillness and my heart. I swallowed hard and listened as the sound of delicate footfall echoed down the hall just outside my door. They paused a moment of hesitation before moving on. It had to have been Charlie. How I knew it remains a mystery to this day. As I listened to him go to his room, I sat up, my tea getting tight. Once again, the house was quiet, but this time it didn't feel empty. Rather, it buzzed with an energy that I couldn't ignore. As I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, feeling the cool floor beneath my bare feet, I couldn't control my movements. I had no idea what I was doing or why I was going in an instant. I found myself in the hallway with the dim light of the nightlight guiding me to Charlie's room ahead. The door to his room was barely visible and a glimmer of moonlight peeked out from the gap at the bottom. I pleaded with myself to return to my room and escape these thoughts before they utterly tear me apart. But my body refused to listen. Slowly but surely I drew nearer, my palm going out to touch the shiny wood of his door. Why was I even up here? He and Charlie, my own child, lingered in my thoughts, and I couldn't resist feeling a particular attraction. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing all the pent-up emotions and thoughts. I gently knocked, the sound barely audible in the silence, but there was no response. All I could think about was how he had looked at me earlier, how concerned he sounded, and how warm his touch had been. As my heart raced, I nervously waited for the door to open, then gently twisted the knob. Its soft light cast a shadow across the room. I gently closed the door behind me and stepped inside to find Charlie lying on his side with one arm tucked under his pillow. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated his features as he breathed steadily and evenly. The blanket was drawn halfway down, exposing his broad back and the subtle curve of his shoulder. He appeared so peaceful, unburdened by the weight of the world. The air here felt thicker and more charged, a sensation I couldn't quite pinpoint. My every step was measured and careful, as though I were petrified. I paused at the foot of the bed, my mind running and my pulse pounding, unsure if I should wake him. I stared at him, my eyes fixated on his slightly disheveled hair and parted lips as he let out a little breath. I caught a glimpse of his jawline's subtle stubble and the way the moonlight glimmered across his skin. He had transformed from a child into a man, and I couldn't help but feel inappropriate emotions for him. He had the audacity to make me doubt my entire self-concept. I sank my knees into the bed as I slowly made my way upon it. When I drew nearer to him on the bed, he shifted ever so slightly, his forehead furrowing, but he still didn't rouse my hand. My hand shook as I gently brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "Charlie." I felt a chill run down my spine as I felt the warmth of his flesh under my fingertips, the result of the simple touch just barely audible. I whispered. I said his name without understanding why or what I wanted him to accomplish. His eyes fluttered open and everything changed. He mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. His gaze was unfocused at first, but as he adjusted to the dim light, they locked onto mine. A wave of confusion appeared on his face, followed by something else. I couldn't quite pinpoint, my voice quiver. As I hurriedly apologized. "I apologize for waking you up." Looking at me, he arched an eyebrow and raised himself up on one elbow. "Why are you even in this room?" The words tightened in my throat, preventing me from revealing the truth. I was unable to articulate the ideas that had propelled me to this point. "I was wondering if you were okay at midnight," he said gently, though I couldn't help but be curious. I averted my gaze as my cheeks flushed. There was no way for me to get any rest. I whispered an admission, my voice trembling, that all I wanted to do was make sure you were all right. He looked at me intently for a moment before responding. The space between us was so thick with electric and heavy quiet that I could feel my heart racing. At last he spoke quietly. "I'm fine. My safety is not a concern of yours." Despite my nod, I remained still. I should have gotten up and left him when my hand was still lying on the bed near enough to feel his warmth radiating. Instead of returning to my room to let the moment pass, I found myself moving closer. My breath caught as I saw his eyes dart to my lips in a low voice. I spoke Charlie's name along with 1,000 other things. I couldn't help but feel a surge of unease as he persisted, leaning in closer and gently brushing against my hand. The sensation was so intense that I couldn't ignore it. "This feels wrong," I said, my voice quivering with fear. However, I still couldn't force myself to step away, even as I spoke the words, "Well, then why feels good, doesn't it?" With a scarcely audible voice, he inquired. I didn't know the answer to the question that lingered between us, but I did know that I felt more alive than I had in years. When his fingers brushed across mine and his intense gaze fixed on me, he cautiously extended his hand and gently cupped my face. His touch was tender, his thumb caressing my skin, and I couldn't control the way my eyelids closed at the sensation. "Mom," he said, his voice tinged with an unidentified emotion. "This has no meaning to me," I whispered, my voice quivering. "Neither do I." Unfortunately, I was unable to stop myself from speaking before I leaned in for a kiss which was tentative and filled with all the unspoken emotions I had been suppressing. The moment our lips met, everything else seemed to fade away. I leant into the kiss, my pulse pounding with each beat. Charlie didn't pull away, his lips warm and slightly quivering, slide against mine, hesitant yet unmistakable, and our connection, gentle and timid at first, was more of an exploration than a proclamation. The kiss between the mother and son was just the beginning. There was much more going on here. My actions were unwarranted. Instead of trying to salvage what little sense was left, I should have apologized and distanced myself, but I refrained from doing so, quivering as it reached his shoulder. His flesh was warm under my fingertips, and I could sense the slight strain in his muscles as he moved in closer to me. "Mom." His voice was gruff and shaking as he muttered into my mouth. I drew away from the kiss, my breath catching as I did so, since it wasn't a query or a protest. Rather, it was full of the same amazement and want that reflected my own sentiments. His expression was a mix of bewilderment and curiosity. As he glanced at him, a mixture of terror and an unexpressed primal emotion prompted me to mumble, "I'm sorry," despite the hollowness of the words. I wanted to convey my regret for what had transpired. His face softened as he looked into my eyes. "Therefore, why does it seem to have happened as it should have?" Behind his lips, he whispered. We were both burdened by the question, and it was impossible to ignore the question eluded me. I was really bewildered. Everything that had been holding me back, including fear, guilt, and uncertainty, seemed to melt away as his eyes met mine. In this particular instant, with a quiver in my hand, I tentatively stroked a lock of hair off his forehead. "I am utterly confused, Charlie." Although I acknowledged that my voice was barely heard, I am no longer able to disregard it. He did not. Not only did he not react, but his expression, together with the way his fingers lightly touched mine, conveyed all the information I required. The air in the room seemed thick and charged as I drew nearer, my knees sliding into the mattress as I sat next to him. While I lingered, my palm pressed against the bed over an inexplicable emotion adjacent to him, and for an instant we only exchanged glances. The sound of nothingness was palpable, yet it held meaning. It conveyed thoughts and feelings that none of us dared to articulate. "Are you certain about this? Are you serious?" he eventually said, his voice scarcely audible. I nodded despite my heart pounding. "I don't know if it's right," I whispered, my voice quivering, "but I do know that being here with you is what I ultimately desire." His breath twitched, and I considered pulling away for a second. Then he extended his hand and brushed across my face. I felt my resolve shatter under his delicate, cautious touch. It sent a chill down my spine. Gradually I drew in my lips, meeting his again. The kiss this time was passionate and unabashed, releasing every feeling we had been suppressing. I was enchanted by the sensation of his body, pressing against mine, his skin's warmth, and the way his lips caressed mine. His hands drew me nearer. As we melted into each other, and my mother continued unabated, he mumbled something into my mouth. As I lowered my head, his voice cracked under the strain. "I don't think," I whispered back, interrupting him. I simply felt the need to say anything. He drew nearer his hands, becoming tighter around my waist. His heart began to beat for me as my fingertips traced over his flesh. I could almost hear the little pause in his breath. I felt a jolt of energy with every contact, as if I were awakening after a long hiatus. His eyes met mine, a mix of vulnerability and desire, and I felt my C*******T constricted as I repositioned him so that he lay flat on the bed. It wasn't only tactile, there was a deeper, more intangible quality behind it. "How are you doing with a gentle touch?" I caressed his face, and he nodded, his eyes fixed on me the whole time. "Indeed," he stated. "I simply cannot believe what is transpiring." His voice is barely heard. I don't either. I have admitted that I am laughing, albeit nervously, and I am eager for it to conclude in what seemed like a surreal sequence of events. He grinned, and then a smaller, more timid smile that hurt my heart. Our hands moved slowly at first, as if exploring new territory, and I gently guided them as we learned to trust one another. Soothing, the depth of his touch, the intensity of his kisses, and the veracity of his whispers were all unlike anything I had ever felt before, and the physical distance between us made our actions seem insignificant. The question of right and wrong became irrelevant. It was about the way he made me feel, the way we fit together so perfectly. When I looked into his eyes, I saw not just my son, but a man. Someone who cared for me, who saw me in a way I hadn't been witnessed in years, and in that moment I knew there was no going back. And so, I finished my duty giving my son what he needed, and I have to admit it was amazing for me too. Then the room was steeped in quiet, the kind of silence that came only after something monumental. The faint glow of the moonlight still spilled across the bed, casting soft shadows on the walls. I lay there in Charlie's arms, his warmth enveloping me, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. But as the haze of the moment began to lift the weight of what had just happened and started to settle over me, I shifted slightly my cheek when I listened to his heartbeat, which was steady and rhythmic. It was almost relaxing, mesmerizing, and for a brief instant I allowed myself to think that this was sufficient, that we could remain encased in the tranquility and allow the exterior world to dissipate. However, reality was unforgiving. It slithered in stealthily and stubbornly, yanking at the margins of my consciousness, asking what comes next, as if speaking out loud would disturb the delicate silence. I murmured, my voice barely audible. As his grip on me grew tighter, Charlie's fingertips ran softly over my shoulder. He confessed in a low, gruff voice. "I don't know, but I do know that I do not want this to stop." I felt a rush of relief and fear. At the same time as his words shook me, I cocked my head to gaze into his eyes, and the raw vulnerability there made my C******T hurt. I began to speak to Charlie, but my words became stuck in my throat. We should have been able to do this again. It was wrong that there wasn't an identical attraction, an identical inconceivable bond, because there was. "I don't care what other people say," he said, as his fingers lightly touched my cheek, causing me to catch my breath. It's something I've never." His genuine tone, and the way he locked eyes with me caused me to waver in my determination. I had never felt this way before, not with anybody, but I wasn't naive. The world isn't so forgiving. I wanted to believe him, that our feelings could live outside of morality. I eventually spoke out, my voice quivering, saying that we can't deny this happened, but we also can't allow ourselves be consumed by it. Scowl, his forehead furrowing in response to what I said. "He told you that you would soon come to regret it." His tone was little wounded. "No." I shook my head hastily. "I am not. Would never look back on this, but it isn't easy either." "Not a single valuable item is I would prefer this whatever." "It is 3, he said simply, his voice unwavering. "Return to denying its existence." His comments slammed into the barriers I had built up around myself. I wanted to protest and tell him he was mistaken, that everything was too convoluted and chaotic. But I couldn't because I knew in my heart that he was right. Time seemed to pass quickly as we shared and whispered secrets. The years we'd spent circling each other, indiscernible from the beginning of our relationship, were completely absent from our conversations. There were pauses when no one spoke. Also when we just held each other and allowed the night's weight to fall on us. I sat up the weight of the day's responsibilities, beginning to settle on me. As the first rays of dawn peered through the curtains, I should go. I said, my voice betraying my reluctance. You are not obligated to, Charlie said as he sat up next to me, his hand gently resting on my back. We can't remain like this forever, I said to him, my heart breaking at the vulnerability in his eyes. I rose up and straightened my clothing in an attempt to dull the agony of losing his touch, but it was too much to bear. He nodded slowly, and I felt his hand slide away. I'll see you at breakfast, I responded with a little grin. I slid out of his room and back into the hallway. The weight of the night pushed down on me, heavy and unyielding. The following day passed in a cloud of normalcy, but nothing seemed normal anymore. Although he didn't react, the expression in his eyes conveyed everything. Despite my busy schedule of making breakfast, cleaning up, and responding to emails, my mind remained cluttered, constantly returning to Charlie's thoughts. Subdued had he become more often than not, his eyes fixating on me. We crossed paths, and every time a knot of guilt and desire formed in my breast. I tried to convince myself that we had to go on and figure out how to get back to how things were before. But deep inside, I just wanted things to stay the same. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house settled into its usual quiet, I found myself in the living room staring out the window. The weight of the day and everything that had happened felt like a physical force pressing down on me. I couldn't undo what we'd shared, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. Mother's voice quiver. He stood at the doorway, his expression opaque, and he paused for a time before walking inside. His movements were slow and deliberate, and I turned to see him. Could we talk? He inquired. My pulse was racing. As I nodded, the room was dark when he was seated next to me. The only light came from a street lamp outside, and there was a heavy feeling of unsaid communication in the air. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke up, his voice barely audible, regarding how last night had been for us. I stared at him, gasping for air, and Charlie assured me that he wasn't asking for anything. His interruption was subtle. All I wanted was for you to understand that my words were serious. I have no qualms about it, and doubt I will ever have any. I felt my C***** T tighten at the candor in his voice, and averted my gaze as my hands fidgeted in my lap. I am not sorry I did it. Nothing about this is easy, he said, his tone soft but firm, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. His words hovered in the air, leaving me momentarily speechless. Then, slowly I extended my hand and brushed against his. It was a small gesture, but the way his fingers curled around mine and the warmth of his touch made it feel monumental. I stated that I am uncertain about what lies ahead. Despite my quivering voice, I refused to let this go just yet, and his smile was a little afraid. But it brought a smile on his face that made my heart race, and we'll figure it out. Joined forces. And as the night progressed, the cares of the outer world appeared to dissipate. The three of us remained entangled in an impossible yet undeniable relationship. Honestly, I'm confused feelings over the occurrence. I haven't told anyone about it, and my spouse has no idea either. So it's clear that I'm in the dark. Am I to feel terrible about what I did? Or should I inform him? Is Charlie to blame? Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel by activating the bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos.